Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back to the course titled Strategic Communication for Sustainable Development. My name is Aradhana Malik and I am helping you with this course. And today in this lecture we are going to talk about the sociological perspectives on sustainability communication. So this is a very interesting topic and it's very close to my heart. This perspective discusses how society as a whole, how the interactions among the members of the society, among human beings, among the community members, among the stakeholders and different players in this whole sustainable development business are influences what we do in the community. And to give you a little bit of brief about this, society is a result of communication. It's only in and through communication that we connect with each other, we bond with each other, we do things with each other, we emerge as a society, and anything we say acquires its meaning as a result of the social and cultural context. So whatever we say, whatever we do is rooted in culture, and culture is what shapes the meaning of whatever we discuss or whatever we share of the information that is present in a context. So any information that is exchanged, any ideas that are exchanged, anything that we do acquires or gets its meaning from the culture, from the context it is present in, from the context it is happening in. And communication is a result of the society. We cannot communicate in isolation. So society is a product of communication, and communication exists because society exists, and communication evolves as a result of the context. And that's a very interesting interplay. I can go on and on and on about that for hours, but due to limited scope, limited time, we cannot really discuss more than that about this. So if you want more information, maybe you can look up my other NPTEL lectures on intercultural communication. That is where I've discussed the social construction of reality through communication. Anyway, little bit of cross reference. But discourse theory approach to communication and institutional processes is what is very relevant in this context. And discourse deals with talk, with interaction, with exchange of ideas, with discussion. So it's not a person an intrapersonal communication. Discourse is interpersonal communication. It's evolution of meaning through discussion. And within this theory we have two types of approaches that we will be discussing, and one is the post-structuralist approach and the other is symbolic interactionist or phenomenological approach. So discourse theory approach to institutional practices says that human beings are able to act because of meanings they attribute to situations, institutions, things, nature, etc., whereby these meanings are continually adapted to a particular field of action. We do things the way we do because of the meaning we assign to these things, to these processes. So for example, primarily in community oriented cultures, nature is treated like a living friend. So when I say tree, I am going to cut down a tree. When I say tree, I am not only meaning or I don't refer to the tree as a source of wood. It's not just wood. It is life. It is a home for birds and animals and bugs, and it is a source of medicinal properties, or medicine. It's a source of medicine. Sometimes the leaves of the trees are used for medicinal purposes. Leaves of the neem tree are very good, for example, and they're very good for insect bites. You just take a neem leaf and rub it on an insect bite, and the effect is reduced. And I don't know if there's any scientific backing to this, but this is personal experience. So a tree is something that gives you shade. A tree is something that is giving you fruit. So when I say I'm going to cut down a tree, I feel sad about it. And that is the meaning that I have been taught to attach to nature around myself. And that is something that is very specific to community oriented cultures. Many of us see it, if it's a timber merchant, for example, if a timber merchant gets attached, so emotionally attached to trees, how will he do his business? So it is all contextual. A timber merchant in a community oriented culture will treat the tree as a source of wood, as a source of living. He will not be emotionally attached to every tree that he cuts down. Whereas a person who is enjoying the shade and enjoying the fruits of the tree will get attached to the tree, because we treat it differently. For us, if the tree is not cut down, it's not going to affect where the dinner on my table comes from. But for a timber merchant, that is the value it has. So even if the timber merchant understands that the tree is a home for birds and animals, still it has to be cut down to put food on the table for his family and children. So that's how we attach meanings. We attach meanings to situations, and we act according to those meanings, right? So our actions are a product of the meaning we attach to different situations, and in order to understand those meanings, we have to be a part of the context. We have to be sensitive to the context, and that is how communication is related to sustainability. We need to preserve nature, and we also need to use what nature gives us in order to live comfortable lives. That is what we were talking about the last time. Generational and intergenerational ethics. How much do I use for my personal gain to make my life comfortable, and how much do I save? Okay. Meanings are not only negotiated interpersonally and situationally, they also achieve a normative, objective power within the process of institutionalization. So I'm not the only one who's assigning these meanings. They are also being decided, they are also being governed within the framework, within the social framework that I'm a part of. So it's, if somebody is cutting down too many trees, I'll say, please don't do it. And they'll say, well, I have to put food on the table. And I say, okay, cut down only as many as you need. Don't waste the tree. So if you're cutting down the whole tree, please make sure you use as much of the tree as you can. And if you can't use it, then you please give whatever you cannot use to somebody who can use it. And this person will say, I have a problem of cartage. So that's how these discussions continue. So there is a normative, objective power within the process of institutionalization, which means that let's just take this example of tree cutting. There are a certain number of trees are allowed to be cut down, but there are, and of course, you have the money. So even then, even if you have all the money in the world, the number of trees that the Indian government allows you to cut down in different areas is limited. And so when you cut down these trees, and there are norms, there are practices, let's take another example which is a little more immediate. For example, in Himachal Pradesh, in the state of Himachal Pradesh, I know fishing is banned during the spawning season. So during the breeding season, you cannot catch fish. It's just banned. So that is, how controls are laid. So even if you want fish, you cannot catch fish in the rivers in Himachal Pradesh during the breeding season. You have to get your fish from another place. As much money as you have, you just cannot use it for that. So that is the kind of controls we levy, and they are these meanings. We understand that sustainable efforts towards sustainability are important, and we say, okay, I will consume this much, I will save this much, and this is how I will control what I consume, and this is how we all as a community will control what we consume, and that is the institutionalization of meanings. Okay, Next is meanings, structure mostly latent everyday knowledge and deliver categorizations through which we try to find our bearings in reality and attempt to influence it. So when we attach meanings, we attempt to categorize whatever is around us. I can say, yes, the tree is so good, it's great, it's a source of livelihood, it's an organism in itself, it's a being in itself, it's living, it's feeling, it's thinking. And then I realized that just my being able to feel the life in a tree is not important. It's also important that I communicate whatever I am feeling to others who may be able to think in a similar manner. And so we categorize what is more important, how do I classify all these different kinds of feelings that I am having. And so everyday knowledge is categorized, and then we root it in reality. A tree is there, yes, there are so many trees and so much of shade is required, but then then we take a realistic estimate of where we want to draw the line between conservation and consumption as far as natural resources are concerned. So, and that depends on the meanings we assign to these things, and that is dependent on the discussions we have among different stakeholders, and that is how the discourse theory fits into the sustainability paradigm. Okay. Meanings also give us a basis for legitimizing or criticizing the existing institutions. So, the meanings we arrive at as a society, as a group, as a community help us understand or help us evaluate what we have in terms of labeling it or in terms of understanding it as valid or invalid. So, if together as a community we decide that a practice that we adopt is legitimate, then we can continue with that practice. And then as a community we decide that this practice has started harming the environment, so we stop that practice. For example, bore wells, the example that I was giving you earlier. Bore wells, drawing water from beneath the earth's surface by digging a tube well into it. So, I think in most cases you find water at a depth of approximately 120 to 140 feet below the earth's surface, and geologists can tell you this, but from whatever I've heard about this, that is the approximate depth to which you need to go. At one point of time when this was a new concept, we felt that this was the way to go. Instead of drawing water from the rivers and streams where when you run out of water, when you run out of fresh water from these natural sources, you can actually go down below the earth's surface and get water from there. So, it was acceptable, and that is why we had a lot of people who could. It was very expensive, so it was a matter of how much money you could pay to draw that water. But then when people started spending money, people got the money, they started spending money, they started going below the earth's surface, a lot of people started drawing water, then we realized that an ecological imbalance was being created. So, now we have realized that maybe it was not such a good idea. It is still a very good idea, it's a very good source of water, but we aren't generating enough fresh water. For the water to go to that level and become so fresh, it has to go through a process of natural filtration. So, whatever water is spread on the earth, it goes down and then it settles down, and that's centuries, and we say it's fresh water. What is fresh? Fresh water, I mean, I don't think that scientifically there is any concept of fresh water. It's clean water, yes, and it has been cleaned by the process of natural filtration. So, anyway, so that water is drawn up. So, now we are renegotiating how much we should draw from the earth's surface, and that has led to the policy regarding the limits imposed on the number of bore wells that can be dug in a particular geographical region. So, our understanding of what resource we can use, how much we can use, what is important, what is not important, what has a higher priority, is all negotiated in and through this social construction of meaning. And how is that done? In a society, in a community, through discussion, through talk, through communication. Communication forms the core of any kind of efforts we put in to for development, especially sustainable development. Anytime we are doing something for the welfare of the community, communication is the only thing that matters. And I'm biased, I'm a student of communication, so that is where my bias lies. I feel everything just boils down to communication, but think about it, okay? Okay, post-structural approaches. So those are the discourse theories. Now discourse theories, we are using two of the discourse theories here. One is the post-structural approach in the discourse theory, and the post-structural approach examines the rule-bound structures of knowledge that discourses are based on. Okay, so this kind of approach examines how different kinds of discussions take place, and the discourses in this, according to this approach, discourses define the kind of questions that may be posed. Who decides which questions can be asked in a discussion? Who decides whether the definition of sustainability or sustainable communication has to be debated or not? What is sustainability? Which aspects does sustainability include? So who decides that? The discourses also determine, or these rules also determine the group of individuals that are authorized to take part in certain discourses. So there are discussions that are taking place according to this approach, in which it is decided whose voice will be heard, who will be allowed to participate in a discussion about sustainability. This is meta communication. We are communicating about communication. Who will be allowed to discuss things? Whose voice will be heard? Contain ways to discipline the whole discussion, and discussions determine the conditions under which certain discourses can take place. So which type of discourse, what is discussed, who will discuss it, how will a discussion end, where will we put a stop to the discussion? That is the discipline part. Where do we draw the line? Where do we say, okay, we've had enough, this is what we'll decide? And the conditions under which certain discussions can take place. When does the discussion start? When does it stop? What are the necessary conditions? Which part of a discussion is used for policy making? When does policy making begin? All of this forms the discourses about sustainability, and these are rule driven, and sometimes the rules are explicit, sometimes they are implicit. We just know who has to talk, it's not written down, but we understand, and that in turn is done, this discussion is done with the sole purpose of examining these structures. So these things are also evolving. Today maybe one thing may acquire a priority, tomorrow because of certain environmental conditions something else may acquire a priority. So that who decides that the priority has to change is also discussed, and so those shifts are discussed according to this approach. Symbolic interactionist or phenomenological approaches. Thank you. These approaches highlight the constitutive dynamics of the social construction of reality. So post-structural approaches discuss the rules that govern the discussions, and this approach says, well, everything is evolving, everything is changing so fast that there is really, everything is so complex that the boundaries between different aspects of the discussion are blurred. And so this approach highlights the movement within the discourse, within the social construction of meanings related to sustainability. And according to this approach, conflict discourses are understood as controversially structured fields of symbolic interaction. Any discourse where there is a difference in opinion is a conflict discourse. Conflict refers to a difference of opinion, difference of ideas, difference in value systems. Anytime there is a difference in perspective, it will be labeled as a conflict. And conflict discourse, the discussion focuses on the differences in perspective, And these differences in perspective are understood as controversially structured fields of symbolic interaction, in which a variety of actors struggle to establish their respective interpretation of problems, their causes and remedies. So different stakeholders are there. When will we have a difference in opinion? Only when there are different people involved, different stakeholders involved, different stakes are involved. For example, some time back there was a big cultural event. I'm not going to take any names, but those of you who read the newspaper will know what I'm talking about. A massive world-class cultural event was held in Delhi, and that was held that was pioneered by a very well-known social welfare organization. And when this event was held, at that time there was a lot of hue and cry, and it came to light when the discussions came to light when the event organizers went overboard with harming the environment. Or I mean, I won't say they were intentionally harming the environment, but the event organizers seemed to have gone overboard with not giving due consideration to the environment. So at that point of time, these discussions came to light, and a lot of hue and cry was raised at that time about how this event was going to help the community, and how much help it was giving, and how much of or how much it was taking away from the environment that it was claiming to serve. So who decides? At that time, people started questioning the validity of this event. Similarly, whatever I discussed in the last lecture about the Winter Olympics that are going to be held in Korea. So Winter Olympics are they're an international level event. But now the big controversy is that a large number of very old trees have been cut down for a 3-day event, and I've seen on social media that there are a lot of pictures that are coming up. People are posting pictures of abandoned Olympic places where Olympics were held. So places, the setups, the Olympic setups, the Olympic the places where Olympic games were held in different parts of the country, and people are posting pictures of how these places have been abandoned, and how they are overgrown with bushes and all, and only for a few days. Yes, this is an important event, but whose voice? Who decides when? Or we'll decide the most appropriate venue. Sorry, the word I was looking for was venue. So who decides which venue they will pick? And can we compromise, or can we say, okay, maybe it's not 100% what I wanted, but it is still in the interest of saving the environment? Can I pick a different venue where I will not harm the environment so much? So that is the discussion that is going on these days, even with events as large as the Olympic Games. Right now, when this recording is going on, the Rio de Janeiro Olympic Games are going on. At that point, it remains to be seen. I'm sure maybe 6 months from now or a year from now, the venue at which these games are going on will be assessed by environmentalists to see how much of damage the building of this venue has done to the environment. And I'm sure the Olympic Games organizers meant no harm, but in order to present their best work, sometimes one has to draw the line. And going back to this theory, when we talk about conflict discourses, we are just trying to see whose voice gets heard. Environmentalists will say don't build any, hardcore environmentalists will say we don't need concrete jungles, let's just build everything with biodegradable material, and so the environment will be preserved. Fair enough. But people who are organizing will say, that's just not, that's a very idealistic way of looking at it. We could, do that, but we don't have the resources to build everything in a biodegradable fashion. So we will have to bring some harm to the environment, but we will try to strike a balance. And who is going to be affected? Whose voice is going to be heard is what is discussed in this. Now, this approach describes how different stakeholders' voices struggle with each other for a space in the discursive domain within that discussion, and how and which stakeholders' voice eventually gets heard, who makes the decisions, who draws the bottom line is what is discussed in this, or what is a part of this kind of approach. Okay. Sustainability communication as a controversially structured field of discourse. Now, when we talk about controversial discourse, we are essentially pointing towards public communication, controversy or conflict in the public domain as far as sustainability communication is concerned. So, public communication is of central importance in establishing new institutional practices that are oriented towards the guiding ideas of sustainability. When we talk about sustainability, we are not talking about intrapersonal communication, we are not talking about interpersonal communication, we are talking about communication from one to many. So, a lot of people are going to be involved in this discussion. Institutional change towards sustainability requires resonant problem framings that are about to mobilize relevant parts of the public so that the governing ideas and storylines of existing institutional practices can be called into question. So, when we talk about an institutional change, we are talking about changing people's ideas, we are talking about changing the way people think about things, we are talking about changing the way people discuss things, and that is dependent on the stakeholders agreeing together as a community regarding this change, and different people's reasons for voicing their opinions the way they do is called into question. Sustainability communication can best be understood as a discursive field in which the competing actors struggle for the power to frame sustainability problems in a publicly accepted way. And I'm going to insist on this again. Community decides, public accepts what is discussed. And sustainability communication is understood as a field of discussion, discursive field, as a field in which different people have the right to voice their opinions and discuss things and come to an agreement about what something really means, in which the different stakeholders whose value systems, whose goals may compete with each other, struggle for their voice to be heard and accepted. The bottom line here is that the sociological perspective emphasizes the fact that the sustainability debate is not just about looking for the best solutions of sustainability problems, but also about a comprehensive norm building process. So, this is about building the parameters on which something will be decided, something will be done, something will be discussed, a comprehensive norm building process, a restructuring of social interpretations of reality, institutional reality and institutional practices. And so how do we discuss, where do we draw the line, and who decides all this? That is something that needs to be discussed more, and that is what the sociological perspective says, that we need to take everybody's opinions into account. If specific ways of framing problems define the range of possible legitimate ways of solving them, then the question of which frames, images and metaphors gain public acceptance is of vital importance for the kinds of policies and measures adopted. So, even if we decide which field will be a part of sustainability and sustainable development, we still need to figure out from which context we will take this. Which part of which field, which context is going to acquire a higher meaning, because when we have to do something at that time, if we are still juggling with different opinions, we cannot move any further. So, some rules, some guidelines need to be laid down, and according to which we can prioritize at different, according to different scenarios, whose voice will be heard, how the policies will be made, how will we actually move and do the sustainable development. It's all about getting things out in public, in the field, and doing things the way, in a manner that they will benefit the community for which they are being done. So, do think about it. This perspective focuses on the role of the community as a whole, different parts of the community and different voices that people in that community will have, and how these voices come together and how they interact with each other and whose voice gets heard and where are the seats of power and all of that. So do think about it, and the purpose of this particular session is to leave you more confused than you were when you started listening to it. It should give you a lot of ideas and make you think in ways that you did not think was possible. Thanks for listening to me. We'll continue in the next class.